When we think of the great empires of history, what comes to mind? We picture Roman legions, Mongol hordes, Alexander's cavalry. We see the glint of steel and the faces of determined soldiers. And when we think of Persia, we picture the Immortals clashing with the heroic Spartans at Thermopylae. We remember the epic battles, Marathon, Salamis, Plataea. It's a story of military might, told for 2,500 years. But this isn't that story. This is the story of the other weapon that built the Persian Empire. It wasn't a sword or a spear. It was quieter, less flashy, and infinitely more sophisticated. It was the stylus on a clay tablet. This is the story of how the Achaemenid Persian Empire was built not just with armies, but with archives, how it managed a population of millions, and how its true strength lay not just in winning the war, but in managing the peace. When you think of the Persian Empire, you think of unstoppable armies and the 300 Spartans. But what if I told you the empire's most powerful weapon wasn't a sword? It was this. This is the story of how the Persian Empire conquered not just with soldiers, but with something far more enduring, a revolutionary system of administration that became the blueprint for empires for 1,000 years to come. The year is 479 BCE. The waters around the Greek island of Salamis are littered with the wreckage of the Persian fleet. Xerxes the Great's grand invasion, meant to crush the rebellious Greek city-states, has ended in a shocking defeat. For the Greeks, it's a victory that will define their identity for centuries. But for the Persian state, the military campaign was just one part of a much larger imperial project. And that project was far from over. As the Persian war machine had rolled through Greece, it did more than just fight. In the sacked cities and conquered territories, thousands of people were taken captive. To Greek historians like Herodotus, these were the tragic spoils of war, destined for slavery. But to the Persian state, they were something else: assets, human resources, and a logistical challenge. Their capture wasn't just looting, it was an imperial calculation. In the logic of empire building, a defeated enemy is one thing, but a captive population is another, a group to be managed and controlled. These captives, swept up in the chaos of war, were about to be processed by the most sophisticated administrative machine the world had ever seen. Their lives would now be managed not by the whim of a single master, but by the meticulous, impersonal gears of the Persian state. To understand what happened next, we have to look past the battlefields and into the quiet, ordered centers of Persian power, like Susa and the grand capital of Persepolis. Here, the empire wasn't run by generals, but by scribes. It was an empire built on records. The Achaemenid Empire was divided into about 20 provinces called satrapies. Each was run by a governor, or satrap, who handled civil matters, but military command was often kept separate, a brilliant check and balance to stop any one person from getting too powerful. This whole system was connected by the famous royal road and a postal system so fast it could get a message from one end of the empire to the other in a matter of days. But the real lifeblood of this system was information. And that information was recorded on clay. In 1933, archaeologists at Persepolis unearthed a treasure trove, tens of thousands of clay tablets buried in the city's ruins. We call them the Persepolis Administrative Archives. These weren't epic poems or royal decrees. For the most part, they were receipts. They were records of food rations, grain transfers, and payments to workers. They were the day-to-day paperwork of a massive organization, and they give us an incredible glimpse into the inner workings of the imperial machine. This is the system that captives and laborers were fed into. As people from all corners of the empire, whether through conquest or as laborers, arrived at administrative centers, they became part of this system. They became data points. Scribes would record details, origin, skills, assignments, transforming individuals into entries in a ledger. They were no longer just Athenians or Ionians, they were workers and state dependents, numbers in a system that saw them as resources to be managed and utilized for the good of the empire. Once accounted for, some groups of people were relocated. The Persian state was pragmatic. Moving populations was a tool used by many ancient empires to break up rebellious groups and integrate new territories. For the Persians, it was a feat of logistics that showed the immense organizational power of their state. Imagine the journey. Groups of people, now catalogued in the archives, could be moved hundreds of miles away from their homes, deep into the heart of the empire. Their destinations were administrative hubs like Sardis, Susa, or Babylon. This wasn't chaos, it was a state-sponsored migration, meticulously planned and supplied by the same bureaucracy that recorded grain rations on the Persepolis tablets. Upon arrival, they were integrated into the empire's vast, multicultural workforce. The Persepolis archives detail how groups of workers and state dependents were organized and given rations. Captives and relocated peoples would have been folded into this system, sorted based on their skills. Some were sent to work in the massive textile workshops that supplied the empire, others on construction projects, and some might have ended up in the households of the Persian elite. This was all part of the Persian strategy of governance. Unlike some empires that crushed local cultures, the Achaemenids generally practiced a policy of tolerance. They understood that a diverse empire was more stable if people were allowed to keep their own customs and religions, as long as they paid their taxes and remained loyal. The goal was less about forced conversion and more about practical integration. A person's identity might change over generations, not because of a direct order, but through the slow, steady process of living in a new land, speaking a new language, and raising children who knew nothing else. For a long time, this story was hidden in the shadow of Greek accounts, which understandably focused on battles and heroism. The historian Herodotus gives us a wealth of information, but his perspective is ultimately a Greek one. To find the other side of the story, we have to listen to the silent witnesses, the administrative archives. While the tablets are mostly impersonal lists of goods and rations, they reveal the sheer scale and diversity of the empire. They list names from all over the known world: Persians, Elamites, Babylonians, Egyptians, and Greeks, all working within the same system. We see a woman named Ionia, a clear marker of her Greek origin, receiving rations. In other records, we might see individuals with foreign names working alongside those with Persian names in state-run workshops. The tablets don't record a war on culture, but they do show the result of imperial policy in real time. They show us how a person from a conquered land becomes a worker, and how that worker becomes a part of the vast, multicultural fabric of the Persian Empire. Imagine a woman who was a girl when her city in Ionia was captured. She is moved to the imperial heartland. She learns to communicate in Aramaic, the empire's administrative language. She might marry a local man or another relocated worker. What stories does she tell her children? Does she whisper old Greek songs in a language they barely understand? Or, out of a need to survive and adapt, does she teach them the ways of their new home? The conquest is complete not when her city is taken, but when her grandchildren no longer feel a connection to a land they've never seen. How was such a complex system even possible in the ancient world? The Persian genius was in administration. While they allowed local autonomy, control remained firmly centralized. The king was the ultimate authority, the sun around which the imperial galaxy revolved. Beneath him was the secretariat, the professional class of scribes and administrators who were the engine of the state. They came from all corners of the empire, creating a surprisingly meritocratic system of governance that would be copied by later empires, including those of Alexander the Great and even Rome. A key part of this control was a network of inspectors known as the eyes and ears of the king. These agents traveled the satrapies unannounced, reporting directly back to the king on the loyalty and effectiveness of his governors. It was a system built on information, oversight, and accountability. This administrative machinery, the satraps, the roads, the postal service, the scribes, and the royal inspectors, is what made the Persian Empire function on such a massive scale. It reveals a fundamental truth about power: the ability to create and manage complex systems is, itself, a weapon. The Persian state didn't need to hold a sword to the throat of every subject. Its control was more subtle, and in many ways, more absolute. It controlled their food, their movement, and their labor. The clay tablet, which recorded a person's existence within the system, was the ultimate symbol of the king's reach. By the mid-5th century BCE, a generation after the Great Wars with Greece, the children and grandchildren of many relocated people were, for all intents and purposes, part of the empire. They might serve in the administration, work in its industries, or even fight in its armies. Their ancestral memories of a land across the sea would have faded, replaced by the reality of life in the heart of the world's first global superpower. The story of the Persian Empire, then, is a dual one. There's the history of battles and kings that is shouted from the rooftops. And then there's the history that is whispered, written in the quiet ledgers of the archives. It's a story of incredible organization, of an empire built not just on the strength of its armies, but on the efficiency of its clerks and scribes. It teaches us a timeless lesson about power. The most enduring empires aren't always the most brutal, but the most organized. They succeed not just by defeating their enemies, but by absorbing and managing vast, diverse populations. They understand that true, lasting control is the power to catalog, to manage, and to administer. A sword can take a life, but a well-run bureaucracy can manage an empire. The administrative systems of ancient empires were vast and revolutionary, and we are still uncovering their secrets. If you want to explore more of these forgotten histories, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And let us know in the comments, what other hidden aspects of ancient empires should we investigate next?